September 1950. With UN troops reeling from North Korean attacks, US General Douglas MacArthur struck deep behind enemy lines, with a surprise landing at Incheon and a rapid push across the country.
The Han River crossing means a full-scale amphibious operation, since the Han, here near its mouth, is well over a mile across.
It turned the tide of the war and led to the recapture of Seoul 2 weeks later. But this was 76 years ago, and no major assault from the sea has been attempted since, with good reason.
I think it's arguably the most complex operation that you'll conduct. Just being able to project force, particularly land forces, from the sea onto the land is made complex by a whole range of things, including the weather, the tidal system, and then of course you've got to deal with the adversary who, depending on how prepared they are, can really create significant problems for a landing force.
The US military is now reportedly considering an assault on one of Iran's islands, and that means landing troops on beaches held by the enemy. An amphibious ready group that includes 2,500 Marines has been moved to the region. That's led to speculation that the President may have designs on Iran's oil hub, Kharg Island.
We have not hit their oil, even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding. But we could hit it, and it would be gone, and there's not a thing they could do about it.
Elliott Abrams was an advisor on Iran to Donald Trump and previous Republican presidents. He thinks a landing is possible, despite the president's apparent desire to wind up the war.
He now has some options to take, if not Kharg Island, one of the little islands that are actually in or right near the Strait of Hormuz. He can do that now. So that is pressure on Iran. At some point, he may actually do it. And I remind you of Venezuela. He had that big buildup of an armada in the Caribbean, and then he used it. He didn't just tell everybody to go home.
Greg Bilton was one of Australia's most senior military officers, a former Chief of Joint Operations who worked closely with the US military. He understands the complexity and risk of amphibious assaults.
An enemy that, as we would describe it in the military, well dug in, is very difficult to remove. Even it doesn't matter how much artillery or missiles you use on the position, some will survive, and that small number can afford quite a significant amount of resistance.
And modern weapons make a landing much harder than it was in 1950.
So mass number of drones, other platforms that are operating autonomously that could be used, subsurface underwater systems, surface systems, all of these could be utilised to try and disrupt a landing.
So far, the US president's goals in this war have been opaque. That may be partly deliberate, says Elliott Abrams.
It isn't that he articulated no war aims. It's that he articulated many incompatible war aims. So you never quite knew, what does he really mean? What are his priorities? But it's a game he plays that is probably helpful with respect to the Iranians, keeping them off balance, never quite knowing, does he really want to end the war? Does he plan to go on for another month? But it also keeps Americans off balance because we have no way of knowing what he's really trying.
But the lack of clarity adds to the challenges faced by America's military planners.
I think if I was to advise the President or provide advice around an amphibious landing, I'd want to have a very clear understanding of the objectives that were being sought to be achieved. To do a proper plan, you really need that clear strategic guidance.
Do you think that strategic clarity has been obvious in this conflict so far?
Yeah, look, I've not been able to get a clear understanding myself.
With no political change in Tehran, the Strait of Hormuz controlled by Iran, and energy prices soaring, it's hard for Donald Trump to declare victory and get out.
If he just up and ends it, and Iran is in the kind of control they are today of the strait, the most Americans will say this was a defeat. On the other hand, if he just takes it further and takes an island, what if there are significant American casualties? He's got a very tough military and political decision to make here, I think.
The president's frustration with the course of this war is there for all to see.
President Trump has issued an extraordinary warning to Iran, threatening to blow up its power plants and bridges if it doesn't open up the Strait of Hormuz by his deadline of tomorrow.
This is all embarrassing and juvenile.
Let me tell you what won't reopen the Strait of Hormuz: threatening war crimes of bombing indiscriminately power plants, cursing at Iran.
If he follows through with that, there is a dangerous, dangerous Rubicon being crossed.
Targeting civilian infrastructure or landing on Iranian soil could make it even harder to end this war.
It could turn out well, but it could turn out, if the Iranians got lucky, to produce a lot of casualties. And then that creates another conundrum for Trump. Do you respond to it by pulling back, or do you respond to it by, if you will, punishing Iran more?
Lord Peter Ricketts is a retired British diplomat who served as the country's first national security advisor and a permanent representative to NATO. He joins me now. Peter Ricketts, welcome to the program. There are reports tonight of a proposed immediate ceasefire put forward by Pakistan. It would immediately reopen the Strait of Hormuz and then have 15 to 20 days to finalise an agreement. Does this sound to you like the sort of proposal that both sides would be at all interested in at this point?
Well, good evening, David. I think we all want to see a ceasefire and the strait reopened, and nothing can be ruled out. So volatile is the situation. But to be honest, I'm very wary of this. I mean, this is the product of those intermediary talks that we've heard about for several weeks now. It's not clear that there is a single interlocutor in Iran with the authority to make a deal. And I think the problem is that this looks like Iran accepting America's principal demand, which is reopening Strait of Hormuz, and essentially getting nothing back for it in the short term. That is their absolute strategic, if I can say, their trump card in this. And they, I don't think, will give it away unless they're really sure they're going to get something worthwhile back. Remember that the last two times they were negotiating with the Americans, they were bombed. So I think we need to be very wary about this. Of course, if it turns out to be the ladder that Trump can climb down away from the self-imposed deadline he's put, so much the better. But I fear that we are not as close to a negotiated ceasefire as that.
And what you've just said there really goes to the heart of whether this and how this can come to an end. You don't believe Iran is going to give up control of the strait, and yet can the US accept any sort of deal that sees Iran retain that control?
Well, no, I don't think Iran is going to go back to a situation as we had before, where the Strait of Hormuz was a free international waterway, anybody could sail around it. I think they are now going to want to monetize their grip on the strait durably with some kind of toll arrangement or nations paying for their tankers to go through. Of course, nobody's going to like that.
Which means, sorry to interrupt, which means permanently higher energy costs for the world, doesn't it?
I think as far ahead as we can see, yes. I think it's going to be an additional cost on energy, which of course then reflects in global energy prices. And none of us want to see that outcome. The Americans certainly don't. But equally, the Americans have not been prepared to lead any kind of military operation to reopen the strait, and I don't think without them any of us are capable of doing that. So I think that is going to be the new reality. I mean, it can be accompanied by a gradual reduction in tension, of course, an end to the war that is going on day by day, and perhaps gradually over time more and more ships are paying to go around. But I don't see the Iranians just going back to how things were.
Donald Trump has been making more aggressive threats about bombing Iran's energy infrastructure. What are we to make of these threats? Do you think they're serious? And do you think they would represent a war crime?
I mean, I think we have to take it seriously when the president of the US says that. Of course, he's got a long track record of making these blood-curdling threats and then not following through on them. I mean, he was doing that in the Gaza war a year or two ago. So it's by no means certain he will go ahead. And maybe this intermediary effort will be the ladder that allows him to climb down from that. I mean, if he does go ahead with wholesale bombing of civilian infrastructure, power stations, desalination plants, yes, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but in my diplomat's view of looking at things, that would, to me, be a war crime. And it will be very interesting to see whether senior American military officers are prepared to carry out orders, which, to my mind, would be illegal orders. So, I mean, Trump has made himself a very, very critical and difficult decision. His track record suggests he will back off the most extreme scenario, but that will leave things continuing. And maybe he then may come back to the business about I will walk away and leave others to sort the mess out. Because I think it is costing him a price in terms of support in his domestic base, as well, of course, as the oil price and pressure from the Gulf allies on him to get this over.
I want to ask you about where this then leaves allies in Europe and the UK in particular as well. You're a former British permanent representative to NATO, and you've argued the alliance is based on trust rather than treaty. Given what President Trump has been saying about threatening to walk away from NATO, how much trust is actually left now?
Well, David, it's been extremely damaging because, as you say, the NATO has a treaty, but it only works if allies trust each other to be there when the chips are down. And I don't think any of us in Europe can now be sure that Donald Trump would. I mean, after the threats to invade part of Denmark, Greenland a couple of months ago, now this, I think trust is at a low ebb. The answer is that Europeans, including Britain, are now scrambling to get closer together, to work more together as a group, to look after our own security. And also, I think the emergence of a very interesting coalition of the willing on Ukraine, including Australia, which has done a lot of work on Ukraine, and which could be the basis for a sort of middle powers, like-minded countries, European and Asian allies working together in a world where we can trust the Americans less.
But if this means there's little trust left in NATO, and well, I'm interested in your view. I mean, do you honestly think the US would, under Article 5, come to the defence or come to the aid of a NATO member who was threatened with attack right now?
Well, I think our trust in that has gone down a great deal since previous American presidents. I think under presidents, right up to Biden, one could be pretty sure, yes, if the Russians attacked, say, a Baltic state, that the Americans would put their full military muscle behind a strategy to either deter the Russians, make them back off, or indeed support us if it came to conflict, heaven forbid. But now I don't think anybody can have that certainty. And so that's why people are looking at alternatives.
If that's the case, and sure, there may be room for middle powers to work more together, but ultimately, if NATO breaks down, what does that mean for Europe and the wider world?
Well, we cannot substitute in Europe for the military capabilities that America brings to NATO. Many of the strategic capabilities we've seen over the weekend, they're extraordinary combat search and rescue capacity. I don't think any of us can match that, or the satellites, or the intelligence, or many of the military enablers. So we would be worse off. We would be left more vulnerable. And I don't think in foreign policy, things never tend to be absolutely black or white. So I don't think it would be America completely walking out and smashing the organization. It would be America winding back their support, perhaps pulling out troops that they have, assets they have in Europe, and the Europeans having to take more of the strain. I mean, that is going to be very, very uncomfortable, but it looks like the new reality.
Well, just finally then, this war is creating awkwardness. We can see it for US allies who are demanding more clarity from Donald Trump about the aims of this war, but not quite openly, opposing the war itself. Is this the appropriate response from leaders like Sir Keir Starmer and Anthony Albanese right now?
Well, it's been a very difficult tightrope. And of course, there's one nation we haven't mentioned yet, which is Israel. And the Israelis don't seem to be mentioned in the intermediary work either. And it was Israel, after all, who took the first steps in this war. So Keir Starmer is trying to walk, like your Prime Minister, a very delicate tightrope between recognizing our real dependence on America, the things we really do continue to share, and the deep, deep public distrust and our deep discomfort about the way he's handled the war in Iran. That is not easy at all, but I think Keir Starmer's been right to stand back from the assault while maintaining links with the White House and doing what we can to prevent, to help deter, defend Gulf allies with the military support we've got there, and all the time keeping a line open to Trump, because one has to go on keep talking to him.
Lord Peter Ricketts, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.